Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to be coming at you with the top 50 overall players in 12-team Superflex leagues. So we did our 10-team Superflex draft rankings earlier this week, and we'll be getting into the 12-team rankings now and kind of describing how we see the quarterbacks going differently, what we would do differently in terms of how to attack each position. And so without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so right off the top, right, we got Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes as the top three picks. I think this is a clear difference from the 10-team leagues, right, where I had those guys kind of spread out throughout the first round and push the receivers up quite a bit more, right? And those were the only first-round picks at quarterback in 10-team leagues. And I talked about the replacement value as to why, right? Like, you go down into the fifth, sixth, seventh round, guys aren't going to be taking their third quarterbacks when they have a lot of roster spots to fill out. So in this case, the replacement value goes down a lot more, right? You're looking at Derek Carr, Will Levis, possibly guys that have starting question marks. If you wait too long, and you're getting like a Russell Wilson or you're getting a Daniel Jones as your second quarterback, that is not a good situation to be in. So that replacement value at the back end definitely is going to push these guys up. Also, with 12 teams, there's going to be more picks between your picks, no matter where you are. So being able to secure one of your quarterbacks and kind of fill in the rest of your positions where there is depth at the position, I think is definitely going to be a more advantageous strategy in 12-team Superflex leagues. So you look down the rest of the first round here, you see Lamar Jackson, you see CJ Stroud, you see Anthony Richardson. So all six of that first tier are now in the first round.
Yeah, and I've done a few mocks and a couple Superflex underdog drafts where I miss out on some of those quarterbacks and I take Chase and Jefferson back to back, and I'm feeling good. By the time the third and fourth round comes along, my team is sunk and buried. So it's just so much different than in 10-team leagues where you can really ruin your season if you don't strategically take these quarterbacks. So it does add a whole different element than we see in 10-team leagues.
Yeah, totally agree. And the other thing too, right, is you see Brock Purdy, who I have as QB 11, go at the end of the second round, right? So you're gonna feel like if you don't pick a quarterback in these first two rounds, which is a strategy you can deploy, you just have to understand that quarterback becomes extremely, extremely urgent after that. Getting both of them by round 5 and at the very latest round 6 is very critical, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you don't even have guys that are confirmed or solid starters for their teams. So and that's going to end up feeling like a reach, right? You're going to be in the third round and you're going to be taking Kirk Cousins, and you're going to be like, dude, should I be reaching on the Matt Stafford in that range, right? Am I reaching there? Getting the value up front, making it feel like you're excited about taking that pick, and then in the third round you can kind of attack other positions that we'll get into in a little bit, right? You'll see how much value there really is with all these quarterbacks getting pushed up. So the third round pick of a position player maybe feels a little more like a second round pick normally would, and so there's a lot of draft strategy that goes into it. But I do think in 12-team, to be able to secure that first one early is something that's very desirable, because then it kind of takes the pressure off of needing to force quarterback picks later in the draft.
Yeah, and I hate this question, and I hate when people ask it, but I'm going to ask you it anyway. Is there a pick that you prefer in 12-team and a pick that you loathe in terms of like drafting one versus 12?
Not really. I mean, I guess looking at this draft with this is another reason I love Superflex is you have Jamar Chase, Breece Hall at the turn, right? Like, if you decide not to go quarterback, you have access to players that just would not be options in regular 12-team leagues. And so the draft strategy, I feel like, is significantly better. Like, you have a chance to really balance your team. You have a chance to get in on guys that wouldn't otherwise be available to you. Now, I mean, obviously, I'd like an earlier pick. I'd like to be in the top half of the draft because then you don't miss out entirely on a tier of quarterbacks if you want to get in on the top six quarterbacks. Because if you're 10, 11, 12, I do think that you're going to miss on the top six quarterbacks. So my opinion is that I would want a top six pick, and that's just pretty standard, though, in general, that I would rather be in the first half of the draft than in the second half of the draft. I understand you get an earlier second round pick, but I think that that's less important than getting the guy that you want up front.
I agree.
If I had to choose. So, I mean, I don't think draft slot really makes or breaks your draft personally. I think that there's value at every pick. And there's guys every year that can swing your draft, right? I mean, who cares which pick you had last year if you took Nico Collins in round 13 and Puka Nacua in round 14? Like, it doesn't even matter what your first picks were, right? Like Kyren in round 15, so that's a bad example, I guess, a little bit, but like there are so many different things that happen throughout the season that you can attack and get your team to a point where you're in really good standing. So, just the quarterback strategy part of it, I think, because, if you start pushing Dak or Burrow or Kyler into the first round, because you really want a quarterback, I don't necessarily think that's the best idea. But, taking them maybe on the swing when it swings back to you is, based on how I have it ranked here with Dak at 14, Burrow at 15, and Kyler at 19, there should be round two quarterbacks that you could take that you still feel pretty good about.
Yeah. And for anyone that's watching this that watched our Superflex draft on Best Ball, if you remember, we took CD at like 8, and then Dak made his way around to us, which stacking in Best Ball is a little bit different, but it is kind of fun when things like that line up and you don't reach on Dak. Like I was trying to get us to reach on Dak. We just stayed patient.
Yeah. And it's a good example of, right, don't overextend at quarterback just because you want a quarterback, just because we're telling you that that's the strategy to employ. If you don't have the pick to do it, or there's other players that have value here. I mean, there's 6 other players in this first round as well, right? So like depending on where you're at, what you're comfortable with, what your draft strategy is. If you say you really like Joe Burrow and you think he's going to be top 5, right? Then maybe don't take Stroud at 8, take Amon-Ra St. Brown at 8, and then try and get your guy at quarterback in the second round. Instead of going Stroud, Wilson, you end up with Amon-Ra and Burrow, if that's your preferred quarterback anyways. So yeah, okay. So, the quarterbacks also, you got quarterback 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 all in round 2 here as well. So we kind of just got the top 6 in the first 2 rounds of the 10-team Superflex. And again, that only goes to 20. So it's a little different here now that we're going down to 24, but we have 11 in the first 2 rounds of a 12-team Superflex. It's just significantly different. There's more teams, and it's more critical that you get one of these guys. The more and more you wait, the less and less of an advantage you're going to have. So, I think, again, I do think it's important to get one in the first 2 rounds of 12-team in a way that it's just not in 10-team. All right, so going to round 3 and round 4 here and finishing off our top 50 overall. We'll go over the quarterbacks that all show up here because there are quite a few more in this as well that make it into the top 50. But I did want to go over the running backs in this section because I did push Kyren Williams up to running back 6 from running back 8. And that in turn pushed Jonathan Taylor down to running back 7 and Travis Etienne down to running back 8. What do you think of that? Do you think that's a smart move, or do you still have Jonathan Taylor kind of tiered above those guys?
I still have Taylor a tier above. I've, laid out a lot of concerns with Kyren over the last few months. I don't really trust Kyren's role this upcoming year in Sean McVay's offense. I think McVay has shown that he will ride the hot hand no matter what. Kyren's had injury issues throughout his career. I just think that there's a chance that if he misses time and, the clone of Kyren Williams that they drafted in Blake Corum, except Blake Corum's probably or at least a more talented prospect than Kyren Williams was, I'm just envisioning this scenario where Kyren just finishes well outside the top 15 of running backs. And maybe I'm just overthinking of it and kind of sticking to that narrative. But when I look at Jonathan Taylor, for example, I don't see any competition. I see an offense that's going to run a lot of plays. I see a quarterback that's going to draw the defense away. If he's going to take off and run the ball as well, I'm just a lot more confident in that pick than I am in Kyren Williams.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because, the Rams needed a backup quarterback or a backup running back. They had nobody else on the depth chart. Kyren Williams was running 95+% of the snaps. That's not sustainable. And I think that maybe plays into the injuries too, right? I think Corum is going to get on the field for 25-30% of the plays. He should take some work away from Kyren. I just don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think Kyren was so significantly better than Jonathan Taylor last year. And, he's getting all kinds of confidence from the coaching staff and his teammates saying that he is still the lead guy. He is the featured back in this offense. So I'm significantly less worried about Corum than you. He was a 3rd-round pick, so, it's not like they used a ton of capital on him. And so I started looking at it, and I don't know. There was such a massive gap between these two last year, even after Taylor got healthy, even after he kind of took over the job. And, he got banged up again in the second half of the year. So we haven't seen Jonathan Taylor be good for like 3 years now. So I basically am kind of chickening out on Jonathan Taylor and saying, look, I'm not going to end up getting him. I'm going to start pushing him down. I might even push him down below ETN before the time's up. And Kyren is definitely somebody I found myself during mock drafts in the middle of the 3rd round with both of them as an option. I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to take Kyren here. This feels like an awesome spot to get in on somebody that has really, really high upside. And so, fingers crossed that he is not an injury concern in the same way. I mean, I don't know if you remember his injury last year, but they literally had nobody else to run the ball, and he got hurt with like 3 minutes left in a game they were winning easily.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be the case this year. Corum's going to be on the field for those snaps. They're going to have somebody else that they trust. And so, I'm hoping that the amount of work that he's going to spell from Kyren helps keep him healthy. And, even if Kyren takes a step back of like 2 or 3 points per game, I still expect him to be better than Jonathan Taylor at this point.
And that's fair. And I think I'm in the opposite camp of the majority of people fading Kyren Williams. And I just think it's just one of these gut feelings that I have. And if I pass on him and he's top 3, like, I'm okay living with that. I don't know. I just can't shake this feeling that Kyren's going to be a potential bust this year. And I know that you win the argument in terms of like data points and facts and things like that. I'm not drafting a guy that early that I just don't trust.
Yeah, and data points and facts don't mean much when you're looking backwards, right? To like make a counterpoint against it. Like, I get he was so much better last year, and like, okay, obviously, like we can look at that. But we're trying to look ahead here, and we're trying to project forward. And I shared those concerns with Kyren, about Kyren with you coming into the offseason. I had him lower than most, and I've just changed my mind based on training camp and what we've heard from the team and from his teammates, even that, he's still the guy. So I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna trust that news and decided to push him up.
And the Rams are a very honest team. Like, usually what they tell us is, it is more straightforward than a lot of coaches. So I'm with you there. Yeah.
Yeah. Like last year, I didn't listen to the coaches on Puka during camp. I mean, he was getting rave reports.
Yeah.
Coaching staff was hyping him up. And I was still like, dude, there's no way it's going to be Van Jefferson. And it's like, oh, no, it's not.
It's like that meme in Interstellar. No.
Watching yourself draft Van Jefferson around 13 instead of Puka.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, and again, not to say that this is a lock. It's just what news I'm going with and what I'm trusting here. So, and something that's changed, right? If you've been listening to us or have started going back into our old content, this is something that has changed for me in a tangible way that, I'm going to start drafting this differently now. So, I wanted to highlight that. And let's get into the second half of the running backs here, because we didn't touch on this in the other top 50 overall video either. So you got Derrick Henry down from running back 9 to running back 13 here. And I've changed this section of the draft too. Henry is still 9, and he's in the middle of the fourth round for 12. Or I'm sorry, that's the end of the third round for 12-team leagues. So he's at that 3-4 turn pick. If you're still looking for a running back and he's there, 3-4 turn. I did say 3-4 turn, I think. So yeah, if you have the last pick and you went like quarterback, receiver, receiver even, because Jamar Chase and say Justin Jefferson might make it there, and you're able to get Derrick Henry and Tua, to kind of start your draft. I mean, I might go quarterback there at that point, because otherwise you're waiting until the end of the fifth round to take your second quarterback. So there's definitely some difficult strategy that goes into those picks, but that's some pretty good talent there that's left at the end of the third round.
Yeah, I think I've been pretty vocal on my support of Derrick Henry this year. I'm getting him in a lot of mocks, and someone I'm going to be targeting quite a bit. So not too much to add on him.
Yeah, nice. And so going into this next tier, I guess, right? Because that was the end of tier 3. My tier 4 running backs have changed a lot. I was anti Pacheco in the draft or in the rankings earlier in the offseason. I had him at 14. I had him at the end of this tier. And now I have moved him up to 10, and I have him at the beginning of the tier. It's just gotten difficult to deny that he looks like the 3-down back. He looks like he's going to be the only game in town. And I don't know how you like continue to push that down, like even as much as I feel like I should with him, because he didn't really finish that well last year. He missed games last year. He was like running back 16, 13 points, 13 and a half PPR points per game. That's not entirely a needle mover, but in the games where McKinnon was out, it was just like he had like 5 receptions, 3 receptions, 7 receptions. And then Andy Reid comes out and says he's gotten better in pass protection, that Pacheco is able to take all of those snaps. Maybe there's somebody else that will, but he's our guy. Like, in a 3-down role as the workhorse in Andy Reid's offense with Mahomes at quarterback, we have seen this position blow up in ways that, that we just you don't see very often from guys down here, even with guys that aren't top end talents. So I decided to push him up. That's a lot of hype for Isaiah Pacheco, somebody I'm not a huge fan of as a player, but I have to at this point move him up to 10.
Yeah, and you're kind of catching up to where I was at with Pacheco. I think I was very cautiously optimistic, but like you said, the more research I did do it with the McKinnon stuff specifically, and then you hit the nail on the head with Coach Reid just saying he's improved in all these facets. Clearly Reid trusts him even after fumbling in the Super Bowl too. So I think that he's kind of moving into that tier next to Henry for me, where before Henry was kind of the last guy that I really wanted to make sure I leave a draft with, whereas now it's definitely moved down to include Pacheco and to some extent Achane, who I would assume you were going to talk about next.
Yes. And for as much as I just hyped Pacheco, right, there's nobody at the running back position with more upside than Devon Achane. He only played 9 complete games last year. His first game of the season, he got like 1 touch and 20% of the snaps. And then he had a game where he got like 1 carry later in the year and went out he wasn't quite ready to come back from injury. He came back a couple weeks too early. Played 1 snap and then didn't play anymore, and then sat the next week and then came back. So 9 games, but he had 800 yards and 11 touchdowns. 800 yards on the ground, I should say. Over 1,000 total yards and 11 touchdowns in 9 games. There's a reason he's going so high, despite the fact that we didn't really see a ton from him. And even over the second half of the year, he didn't even play that much. He was not even getting up to 10 carries very often. So the stats on him are driven a lot by that Broncos game, right? He had over 200 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 40 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. So I understand if you don't think that's sustainable, but I also don't understand denying that as like an upside play. And as somebody that's like, when he gets it rolling, you're not catching him. He's one of the fastest running backs in the league. And he plays in a great offense. They have a great scheme. McDaniels knows how to run the ball. And so if he's going to be featured, if he's going to be getting 15 touches a game, this is going to be too low, especially if he stays healthy. He's going to exceed this for sure. So if you're looking for a home run swing, if maybe you haven't gotten a running back and you're in the in the fourth round of your end of fourth round of your Superflex league, you went quarterback, receiver type of thing, and it's coming back to you and you don't have a running back yet, and Achane is there, again, risk tolerance, but he is somebody that can absolutely make a difference, a major difference on your team. I've said this before, he gives me Jamal Charles feels in terms of how efficient he is on the ground. And when Charles came into the league too, he was a little considered undersized, considered like fast, like almost a scat back. And then that didn't matter. He was just so good. And he was able to ultimately stay healthy and became like a fantasy superstar. So I think Achane can do that. He just needs to find a way to be able to stay on the field. So they haven't said much about it, but when Achane is healthy, I expect that he's going to play a bigger role than he did down the stretch last year. I think he was continuing to struggle with that injury, coming back and then kind of re-aggravating or having to go back out. I think they were trying to pick their spots with him towards the end of the year. And that Mostert was just healthy and rolling. So they, every week too, it was like going into the week, it's like, is this going to be the week that Achane gets more work? Is this going to be the week that Achane gets more work? And it just never quite materialized because of how well Mostert was playing and how healthy Mostert was. But we've talked about this a lot. Mostert is not the beacon of health. He is somebody that if he stays healthy, he's going to be great again. But he's never stayed healthy for 17 games other than last year. So, there's also that element too, that Achane has his injury risks. But if Mostert goes down, I mean, you're going to have Jalen Wright and Achane running this backfield, and Achane's going to get all the work, and he's for sure going to have a 15-touch role in that situation. Again, I don't know exactly how it's going to play out when they're both healthy, but I still do expect this to be a little bit more David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs at the end of last year versus how this dynamic did play out. And then the last running back, just to touch on here, Josh Jacobs. Kind of a boring pick, right? He finished as running back 27 last year. He wasn't great. He missed 5 games at the end of the year, so he only played 13 games. But we're only 1 year removed from him going over 1,600 rushing yards and finishing as running back 3. And so, going to a better offense, if he is going to take the passing game work here, which he's capable of, it's just, assuming they give him the passing game work, assuming he is the goal line guy. If both of those things are true, he's going to exceed this draft position, right? And again, I keep making the upside case for these guys here, but that's kind of what's driving me to rank them this way, because otherwise you have all these other running backs that you could just like pass on these guys and go further down. But I think these guys are uniquely positioned because they have more upside than the guys behind them. And so, I do have high hopes for Josh Jacobs. I am a Packer fan too, so I'm a little bit of a homer on this one. But I think Jacobs is in a good spot to succeed. Yeah, and again, we're coming back to the end of the 4th round, right? So if you have the first overall pick, these are kind of your options. So, Jacobs might be the first running back you have a shot on. And, depending on how you draft your first 3 rounds. And so I think he would be an excellent player to have in 12-team Superflex as your first running back. All right, and with that, we kind of finished out our top 50 overall with 12-team Superflex. We didn't get a ton into the quarterbacks on the back end here, but you can see we went all the way down to Trevor Lawrence, which is quarterback 17 here instead of quarterback 13 that we finished with last time. So there's 4 or 5 more players at quarterback in here, and a lot of these guys pushed way up, right? Herbert way up, Goff way up. The 33 is about as high as you're going to see Goff, I think, but I just value that veteran presence and being able to count on him as a starter for a good team, a good offense, and you're going to have no worries about plugging and playing him every single week. So overall, and you see one of the rookies sneak in here at 45, Caleb Williams. So, I did move Caleb ahead of Trevor Lawrence, and I'm getting pretty excited to draft Caleb Williams. And, in the 4th round, I think that's about the time into 4th round, if you get like, an early quarterback, so you get Mahomes at 3, and then you go away from quarterback for a couple of rounds, and then you can take the upside of Caleb Williams. I think that's a reasonable time in 12-team to get in on that position. All right, and with that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.